Hey, Bill Lethman here for Money Evolution. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about asset shifting strategies that could potentially help you to improve your long-term tax outcomes. And when we're talking about asset shifting, what we're really talking about is how we can move money potentially between these three primary tax buckets, and also how we're contributing money to those three primary tax buckets. So typically we have money that's in non-retirement accounts that's outside of any kind of 401k or IRA account. We have traditional retirement accounts that money went in there on a pre-tax basis, and it's going to come out taxable. If it's a qualified distribution later on, you pay taxes later, or Roth retirement assets that grow tax-free, and as long as it's a qualified distribution, are also tax-free as you withdraw that money as well. So while you're working and you're contributing money to things like a 401k or an IRA account, you have that first decision, and that is where you're going to put that money. But as you start to hit higher levels of income, and maybe you're maxing out these opportunities to put money into a 401k or a Roth account, you might start to build up money in this non-retirement account bucket. So that's largely what we're going to be talking about here today, is how do we get money out of this non-retirement account bucket into one of these more tax-advantaged accounts. So when we're talking about 401k contributions, because I think for most people that's probably going to be the primary mechanism to get money in, we do have some limitations. If you're under the age of 50, that limitation for 2025 is $23,500. But if you're 50 years old or older, they're allowing for a catch-up provision, as you probably know, and that's $7,500 additional. So if you meet that qualification, you could contribute up to $31,000 to your 401k plan. But there's a brand new rule that just is going into effect here in 2025 that a lot of people aren't really aware of yet, and it's called the super contribution. So if you're age 60, 61, 62, or 63, unfortunately just for those 4 years and those 4 ages, you're allowed to contribute an extra $3,750 for 2025. And that's based off of a calculation, if you will, that's going to be 150% of what the regular catch-up contribution is, or $10,000, whichever is greater. So we're hitting that greater amount there. So $11,250 is what that number is here for 2025. But what a lot of people may or may not realize is that the actual IRS limitations to how much money can go into these accounts is actually much higher than that. And so if you're under the age of 50, that total amount that could go into these employer plans is $70,000. And if you're 50 years old or older, it's $77,500. And if you're one of those 4 magical ages and you get that super catch-up contribution, it would be $81,250. So how that works is they're going to add up all of the different contributions that are going into your employer-sponsored plan. Those regular contributions, the matching contributions, plus any additional catch-up, including the super catch-up that you're eligible for, and that's going to equal the maximum total contributions. So that's going to be one of those 3 numbers right there, depending on what age you're in. So another new rule, it's not in effect yet, but it will start going into effect in 2026, is that if you have earned income, that W-2 income from whatever employer-sponsored plan you're participating in, if it's greater than $145,000, they're going to force you to start putting your catch-up contributions into a Roth 401k plan. So that's going to be an important new development that's coming into effect next year. One other little side note here is that the super catch-up contribution, your employer has to basically support that essentially. So if your employer allows for that super catch-up, you're going to be able to do that, but not all employers are forced to do that. The other thing is that this extra contribution that might be between the amount of your regular contributions that match and the catch-up contributions, that difference, that's going to be done through, sometimes people refer to it as a mega backdoor Roth account. And I'm going to get into some details on exactly how that works. And that is another thing that your employer-sponsored plan may or may not have available. And even if they do have it available, there may be some limitations to that. So even if you do have, for example, $37,000 that you're eligible to put in, they may limit that to some percentage of your base income or your gross income. So you may not be able to fully capitalize on that. But if you're not sure and you are wondering about this, you want to call your plan sponsor and you want to ask them, do I have this after-tax option available as an additional contribution source inside of my 401k plan? So here's how this works. So we're going to use an example, and in just a few minutes, I'm going to be hopping over into our financial planning software and modeling this out and showing you how we map this whole contribution asset shifting strategy inside of our software. And then we're going to show what some of those outcomes could potentially look like here. But we're going to be going into the Steve and Sandy Bishop plan, and we're going to use Steve here as the example because Steve's employer does allow for some of those after-tax contributions. So Steve has got his regular contribution, $23,500, and then he's going to have his regular catch-up contribution. He's also, I think, 62 years old in the plan, so he is eligible for that super catch-up. So he's going to have an additional $3,750 that's going to be available. His employer is contributing $9,000 to his plan, and that is for a total of $43,750. But because Steve is in that super catch-up contribution mode, his total contributions can get all the way up to that $81,250. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that $81,250 and we're going to subtract $43,750. I think I wrote that number down correctly. So he could contribute an extra $37,500. And the way that he's going to do this, this is something, a type of plan that's been available inside of 401k plans for many, many decades. But up until relatively recently, there wasn't really a clear IRS direction on what could be done with those after-tax savings. But I think it was in 2014, the IRS finally gave us some clarity and said that you can now take those after-tax contributions and then directly roll them over into either a Roth IRA account or a Roth 401k plan, depending on what your employer may allow you to do there with that. So the mechanism is going to be to put that $37,500 into a Roth or into an after-tax account. Sorry, got a little messy there. And then that's going to immediately or somewhat immediately get rolled over into a Roth IRA account. Now, this is another area that your employer-sponsored plan may have some different rules on. Sometimes they let you do it once a year. Sometimes you can do it as much as you want, even monthly. And some employers are even doing this automatically for people, recognizing that this is a very good opportunity for their employers or for their employees to get more money into their Roth account. So sometimes this happens automatically, but sometimes you actually have to make that call or set that up within your plan sponsor to get that money over to a Roth IRA account. You're not getting any tax deduction when that money goes in. It's again after-tax money, but it's a way to get money into a Roth account even if you're over some of those income thresholds. Now, additionally, you can do something very similar with a Roth IRA account. So as many of you know, especially if you are in one of those upper income brackets, if you make too much money, you can't make contributions directly to a Roth IRA account. So for 2025, if you're single and make under over $150,000, I should say, or if you're married filing a joint tax return and you make over $236,000, you're not going to be able to make a contribution directly to a Roth IRA account. However, as long as you don't have any other outstanding IRA accounts, you could do the same thing. You could contribute that money to a traditional IRA account and then immediately or somewhat immediately convert that over to a Roth, even if you're over those limits. If you do have an outstanding or an existing IRA account, you won't be able to do this, or you could do it, but it would get very messy and it would not accomplish the objective that you want because the IRS treats these conversions as a pro rata. So even if you're contributing after-tax money to a traditional IRA account and then converting it, if you have any other IRA account money, they're going to look at that amount of the conversion as a percentage of all of the IRA account money that you have. And when we get into the scenario here with Steve and Sandy, what we're going to learn is that Steve has an existing IRA account. He rolled over an old 401k plan to an IRA account, so he is not going to be able to do this backdoor Roth. But Sandy, however, only has a 401k plan, so she would be eligible to do this backdoor strategy, and we're going to get into that and illustrate that. Okay, so let's hop over into our software. Now, the tool that we're using for this and the software is called eMoney, and we're using the advanced planning module of the eMoney financial planning software, and we're in the Steve and Sandy Bishop financial plan. plan, and they have done very well for themselves. They make pretty good income, but they're very good savers. In fact, as of right now, they've accumulated a little bit over $4 million in total portfolio assets. They're planning on working a few more years. Steve's 62, Sandy's 60, and they're going to work basically through the end of 2029, as we can see here. But because they're putting so much money into their savings, their cash flow is really pretty flat. They do have some positive cash flow. Some years have been better than others. There's a little bit of a negative cash flow there next year. I think they have a big expense that's planned out, and that's one of the nice things we can do within this tool is really map in all of the different things that are happening in your life. But we can also see what they're currently doing with their savings, and pretty much right now they're just going to be contributing the maximum amount to those retirement plans. And I laid this all out and changed that already to reflect that new rule that's going to go into effect in 2026. Sandy's income is not quite at that $145,000 level, so she can continue to contribute money to her traditional retirement account. However, Steve is over 145, so beginning next year, he'll need to split up that catch-up contribution into the Roth 401k plan. And when we look at this and we said, okay, well, if we started to really take advantage of that, if Steve really can put in an extra $37,000 into their accounts, their cash flow is going to turn negative. So what is ultimately going to happen is we're going to be shifting money from our non-retirement account bucket into the Roth retirement account bucket. And we have a really nice report that can show us that. And we can see over time what's happening to those three different buckets: our taxable assets or non-retirement, tax deferred or traditional, and then tax-free, which is going to be our Roth bucket. And we can see they have very little saved up in Roth, but they have most of the money in those traditional accounts. But what starts to happen also are some of those non-retirement account assets also start to grow, especially later on when those required minimum distributions kick in, because they're actually going to be greater, much greater than what they're going to be needing to take out for their expenses and everything into retirement. So we already set up a scenario here, and what we did is we really kind of mapped out a number of things here. We mapped out the maximum contribution that Steve can make to that after-tax bucket and then immediately convert that over to Roth. We also mapped in and took advantage of Sandy's ability to do that backdoor Roth and contribute the $8,000 that she's eligible to contribute to a traditional IRA account, not getting any tax advantage up front, but then immediately converting that over to Roth. So it drastically increased that. And then what we see is when we look at all of this together, we can see what the impact of that is on two key areas. And we're going to look at a third area in just a minute here. But we can see that over their lifetime, by utilizing these asset shifting strategies, they were able to save $276,000 in taxes over their lifetime. And because of those tax savings, they were able to increase their portfolio assets by over $1 million in that. So the strategies that we implemented were, again, doing that mega backdoor and the backdoor Roth, but we also added in some Roth conversions in here as well. So by taking advantage of getting more money in some of those traditional retirement accounts right now while they're still working, we were able to take advantage of some lower tax years and do some fairly large Roth conversions. And that really had a positive impact there as well. So when we come back over here to our assets report, we can compare what that looks like with our base facts, which is not doing any of these asset shifting strategies, to what it looks like with the strategies that we're talking about here today. So we see real quick visually a very different picture here. With those asset shifting strategies, we were able to kind of control both the non-retirement account buildup, those dark blue lines, as well as our traditional retirement account bucket, and keep them from growing quite as much. And in turn, basically, we got more money in the Roth accounts. So when we look at this, even though the final number, we run this all the way out to age 95 for each of them, we see, again, there's about $1 million of advantage to doing these strategies. However, when we look at the difference and the breakdown of these assets, we see even a bigger positive impact, and that is that our Roth account, by doing these strategies, is $7,800,000 compared to just $449,000 if we didn't do these strategies. And you might say, well, okay, well, 95, that's going to have many, many years and decades of compounding. But even if we look at something out into their early 80s here, we can still see a pretty big difference there. They didn't quite catch up on the amount of money that they have in total assets. We're still a little bit behind because we did have to pay some more taxes on some of these Roth conversions up front and everything, but we see when we net that out, we're likely going to be much further ahead. We have $3,700,000 in Roth compared to just $213,000, and we've reduced our exposure to some of those RMDs, those required minimum distributions that are going to kick in at age 75 for both of them here, and we can see that here. So when we look at our cash flow, one of the other really nice things about the software is we are able to see, if we just kind of leave everything alone, we don't do any of these strategies, what is that RMD going to look like? And it starts off big, and then it gets bigger and bigger. So by the time Steve and Sandy are both hitting that RMD age at 75, they're taking out, or forced to take out, $273,000 out of these accounts, and then it very quickly escalates to over $400,000. So it pushes them up into a very high tax bracket. When we look at what we just mapped in here with the asset shifting, we can see that these are much more controllable. We still have quite a bit, and maybe there's still a little bit more refinement that we could do here to maybe do more of those Roth conversions and some other strategies to bring that down even more. But we definitely have saved a lot of those required minimum distributions over time. And so anyway, one more thing I'll show you here too. So when we go into our decision center here, one of the things we can see, and as we map this, we can see visually with our base facts, we can see where some of our low tax years are and what the tax rate is going to be in the future here. So the rate, right now they're in a 24% tax bracket, but in early retirement they're going to hit 10, 12%. And that's something we oftentimes talk about. And that's a really big opportunity to do some of these Roth conversions and things. And then later on, they'll pretty much be in a 24% tax bracket. One thing here, you do see this jump up at the very end of the scenario. And that's because, again, we run both of the scenarios out to their age 95. But because there's a 2-year difference, when Steve passes away, Sandy's going to be left with the same amount of money pretty much in those traditional retirement accounts and still have about the same amount of required minimum distribution. So her tax rate, because when one spouse dies, you go from a married filing joint tax return to a single filing tax return, you're going to hit higher levels of taxation at lower levels of income. So if we were to plan out a scenario, which we have the ability to do, like a premature death, and we said, okay, what if Steve passed away early, or maybe Sandy passed away early? It's not always the husband. So, but you might see that, again, that tax rate jumping up there. So that's another big advantage of doing some of these Roth conversions. But when we do the asset shifting, and we put that back in here, we can see that we were able to control that. Instead of being in the 24% tax bracket for most of their retirement, we're able to stay and maintain in that 22% tax bracket. So anyway, I hope that helps. I hope that gives you some ideas on just some of the things you should be thinking about as you're going into retirement, or even as you're still contributing money to your retirement savings accounts, and how do you take advantage of all of this. So if you want to learn more about the software that we're using and the eMoney financial planning software, we have a great program for that. It's called the Retirement Time Machine, and if you want to learn more, you can check out our website or go to retirementtimemachine.com for more information. Thanks, and I'll see you back in one of my next videos.